of the prodigal son. Probably one of the parables is best known in the Bible. It's up there with like Good Samaritan, that if you bring it up even among folks who aren't like churched, they'll basically know what you're talking about because they've heard it before, here, there, and just about everywhere, right? But here's the thing. The preaching we've heard on it, the teaching we've heard on it year after year, probably for the last 2 or 3 generations of preachers, I think stops early or gets it completely wrong. This is why it's going to be another installment of my on-again, off-again sermon series, Lies My Pastor Told Me, the Prodigal Son. So let's start off with what I think preachers have historically gotten right, which I'll give it to them is like the first 2/3. Right? The sermons you have mostly probably grown up with is a sermon where they concentrate on the prodigal son and the father. And they remind you that if you are the prodigal son of your community or your family, when you go back to your Father in heaven and you say, I have sinned against you, and you throw yourself on the ground, you will be, pulled up in loving arms. That there is nothing that you can do. There is no force in this world that can separate you from the love of God no matter what. For God has unboundless grace, unbounded love for all of his children. Right? That sound about right? And that's basically the sermon. I mean, they probably hit it with more analogies, maybe some fun stuff, but that's basically like the core of the sermon. And I gotta tell you, nothing about that is wrong. That absolutely gets to the core of the father-prodigal son relationship. But if you remember, we have forgotten a major character. What character have we missed? The elder son. Now, I'd say about 50% of the sermons I heard growing up stop and don't even try to touch the older son. They just ignore that he's there. And all the older and middle kids are like, of course they did. Okay? And we get to the older son. Now, I say about 50% of the time, preachers would try to take on the older son, and I think this is where things went awry. So I've seen it basically taken on one of 2 ways, and you've probably seen the same thing. One way is to really carry this father analogy all the way out to its end, which is to say, we have prodigal sons out there, but you all are not prodigal sons because you showed up to church this morning. Right. That's how that works. Okay? And therefore, be like the father. Don't be like the older brother. Receive your brother back when they come back. Okay, that's not bad advice. It's okay advice. Others, however, will go a step further. And they'll chide the older son. Don't be jealous. Don't be resentful. Always lead with mercy. Have abounding love like the father. Just embrace him. Be the father, not the older son. We all heard that one before? Yeah, most of us, some point. When you go there, I think you miss out on a huge, vitally important part of the conversation that's in the Bible. So let's take a moment, dig into that older son's conversation with his dad. The conversation that is really uncomfortable. Okay? The older son leans into the dad and is like, I have been here for years. I have been working for you, and I don't even get a goat, and he gets a fattened calf. I mean, that older son is mad. Okay? His dad responds with 2 answers. Answer 1, you have always been with me. Not that you always will be, but you've always been. It's past tense, right? You have always been with me. And then the second thing he says is, and all that I have is yours. Let's take on the first one and then the second one, because both are key to understanding what this gospel is getting at. You have always been with me. He is noting that for all the fun the prodigal son had, he is the one who lost out, not the older son. Why? Because there was a whole slew of years that older son had dad all to himself. Years the prodigal son cannot get back. Because that's how years work. And I can tell you, having sat with many people who passed away, nobody has ever regretted for the lack of parties they went to. A lot of folks wish for one more day with dad. or with sister, or with mother, or with grandma, or with grandpa. That is the thing that causes folks to cry even years later. See, the prodigal son might have had some parties, but he lost years with his dad. Years he will never get back. Years that the older son had. And so the father's reminding the older son that he too has a blessing, a much greater blessing than any amount of parties could ever replace. But then there's the second part. All that I have is yours. Now this is something I think everyone who reads it realizes it, but never thinks out the implications of this. So he divided everything he has between the two sons. He gave half to the younger, half to the older, right? It says that right at the beginning. Younger spends everything. So he's saying a very literal thing right now. Everything I have is yours, older son. But let's think through the implications 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. We don't know how old the father is, but there's a huge implication here for the younger son. See, the younger son is in there partying, eating the fattened calf. That's what he's doing today. Tomorrow, he better start repairing that relationship with the older brother. Because guess what? If 5 years or 10 years or 20 years down the road, the father passes away and the whole farm literally goes to the older brother, and the younger brother hasn't reconciled, guess what the younger brother is going to be doing in a few days? He's going to be feeding pigs again. Right? I mean, think about it, guys. This is a temporary reprieve the father has given the prodigal son. This is not cheap grace. See, the father reacted with mercy and love, but not only with mercy and love. He reminds, in fact, points out to the older brother that he has changed the entire power dynamics between those two. Because the younger brother better figure out how to make up that relationship, or he's feeding pigs again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in 5 years or 10 years, but the father ain't living forever. But what does this mean for us as Christians today? Well, I think it is a calling in two senses. I think the sermon you heard with the passion you've heard over and over and over again is a good sermon. It's just lacking half of the equation. See, the half of the equation it gets right is that we as Christians are called to be people of mercy and grace and love. And when we can and how we can, we should try to be open and to hug and embrace those who have gone astray, whatever that means. However, we are also equally people of justice. We are people who search out to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And I think it's very important for us to look at what the Father does. He doesn't get justice by punishment. He gets justice by rearranging the system. The thing the prodigal son did could never be done again. He has no half to squander again. It's gone. So for us as Christians, I think it's a call that when we see injustice, especially when we see injustice that's repeated over and over and over and over and over again, it is not just a call to always respond with just mercy or just love. And it's not a call to respond with condemnation, but it is a call to respond by figuring out what is wrong with the system that allows this bad thing to happen over and over and over again and go in and fix the unjust system. And wouldn't it be miraculous if we as Christians, especially we as Lutherans, were just as passionate about love and grace and forgiveness as we were in our pursuit of destroying structural prejudice and bigotry, and destroying those things which go ahead and cause people to be hurt over and over and over again. For we as Christians are called to balance to balance both grace and mercy for the individual, which we should always give, regardless of the offense, but then equally work as hard to make sure it can't happen again.